Hi, my name is Pam Rackley and I work for Mulqueen Sewing Center in Mesa, Arizona. And we are doing the Haunted Halloween Sampler Block of the Month. In the kit is included all of the fabrics for the front of your quilt, also all of the directions in a book form, and I've also included a fabric key with the selected fabrics that I've chose for this particular quilt. When I picked these out with the key, what I've done is I've also included some plastic bags because each one of your blocks have several pieces that go with it, and once you cut these out, you're going to want to keep those completed in a bag. The first thing that I've done with this is I've taken a felt marker and little pad of paper, and I've gone through and marked each one of my fabrics with the name of the fabric. These are some of the tools that you're going to need to complete your quilt block. You want at least an 16 or an 18 by 22 or 24 cutting mat, because you are going to be cutting fabrics that are at least 22 inches wide. I also picked a couple of different size rulers. You'll be making some strips which you're going to cut into blocks, and then you're also going to be cutting some squares. When you pick out the rulers that you're going to use for this, you want to make sure that your ruler is marked with little 1/8 inch. Some of your blocks are going to be 5/8 or 3/8. So you want to make sure that those are easily marked on the rulers that you're going to use. You're also going to want safety pins, and I'll show you about those in a minute. Some flower head pins, some type of marker to mark your fabric to do your half square triangles. I've got friction pins, which once I press my half squares open, the heat from the pen will make my lines disappear. The other thing that I use for my half square triangles is a quick quarter. They make a couple different sizes. This one is, I believe, a 12 inch, so that you can do small squares from 2 inches up to 12 inch half square triangles. The other things that I used was just a regular pencil, a highlighter, a felt tip marker, and I have a pen to make notes with. I like to add a little sizing to all my fabric, so before I cut, I always take my fabric to my ironing board and use some best press on it to give it a little bit of sizing. The thread that I like to use to do all my piecing, I use Masterpiece thread. It's a 50 weight thread, which is a little lighter weight, so when you do press those seams open, you don't see your stitches in that. A good rotary cutter, either a 28 millimeter or a 45. You'll normally only go through maybe 2 to 4 layers of fabric at a time. And I also got 2 or 3 of the little packages of sticky notes to be able to mark all of my fabric. The first thing that I had done is I went through with my key, selected my fabrics, put the name of what my fabric was called, and took my sticky notes and safety pinned it to my fabric. That way it doesn't get lost, and I just pinned it to one of the small corners that was away from where I was cutting. Just to review, you want to make sure that you mark each one of your pieces of fabric using the key that you were given. You have several different greens, several different yellows, several different oranges. You want to make sure that when you pin on the colors, that it coincides with the key that you have been given. There's still a couple more things that you need to do before you start cutting your fabric. On your key, you have 4 pages of all of your colors of your fabric. It's telling you what the color is, what the yardage should be, and then down below it, it is giving you the different blocks, how many of each size of cut you are going to make to each one of these. To make this easier for me, I went through and took a white label on my baggie and wrote down each block, so that as I cut my fabrics, I could separate those and put those into blocks. I basically cut all my pieces first and then went back and started putting my blocks together. Once I got my block cut, I went ahead and highlighted it, and if you're like me, you may have get interrupted 4 or 5 times, so I always made sure that I highlighted the one that I cut so that I wouldn't cut it again. Once I've got the name on the outside of my baggie when I went to cut, I also wrote on a piece of paper what it was used for, what the cut was, and how many of those I had cut out. A lot of your pieces may be 1 5/8 by 2 5/8. You've got all different sizes, so it will be much easier if you mark them as you go along, then go back and try to measure everything when you get ready to put your blocks together. Once I get these done, my colors are cut, then I've got everything bagged, each one, and you can use baggies or go to the craft store and get plastic bags. You can get everything in there. So now, as I cut my colors and my fabric, I have them all laid out into my different blocks. This is the first block that I chose for us to do in the series, the block of the month, and it is called the Yankee Puzzle. With this one, these were in my bag that I had marked as Yankee Puzzle. You are going to have 4 of the 11-inch finish size and 8 of the 8.5 finish size in this particular block. So I've got all of my squares cut. What she suggests that you do is that you cut those diagonally, put them together, and stitch them. But I don't like sewing on the bias, so what I've done is I've left my squares together. I've used my quick quarter ruler. I line the edge up with this point, the other center with this point. I use a fine tip friction pen, and I draw my line here. And here. I drew my lines on the yellow because it's the lightest of my fabric. With the yellow, you're gonna be putting purple and also the orange on those. This is a good little job to do in front of the TV, is just to sit and mark all of the yellow on the back. Once I get these marked, then I'm going to go to my machine. I'm going to use my Masterpiece, probably a beige color. I'm going to set my stitch length to a 2.0, and I'm going to chain piece these. So I'm going to start on one side and I'm going to stitch, and I'm just going to keep feeding these through until I get about 12 or 14. I'll go back, clip them, turn them around, and feed those back through the machine. Once I get done with that, I'll lay those on my mat, centering my ruler from point to point and go ahead and use my rotary cutter and cut these in half. This way it's really nice because I was not sewing on any bias, and this is going to keep my blocks square. Once I get done with all of my blocks, I will take it to the ironing board. I do like to use a little spray starch or Mary Ellen's. I'll spritz it a little, touch my iron to it to set my stitches, and then when I open these up, I want to put the dark side to the top. That way when I press it over, my seam is going to go to the dark side and you won't be able to see it on your lighter fabric. Okay, once I've got everything pressed, you always have these little dog ears. So what I've done is I've just gone back through and trimmed the little dog ears off. Once I've got that completed, then it's time to put my block together. So there is a diagram on the back, on the second page, that shows you how to place your squares to get your block together. You are just going to follow the instructions. You're going to sew a roll at a time. What I normally do is I'll sew these two and these two, these two, these two, these two, these two, these two, and these two. Go up, press, and then flip these over and sew the four set together. Once I have all four rolls sewn, I will go back and I will sew each roll together. When I get done, I have a finished block. This completes block 1 of our haunted house sampler. If you have any questions, you can reach me at pam@mulqueensewing.com with any questions about cutting this or putting this together. We'll see you next month.